have a story to tell. Some of us like to tell our stories about our lives. Some of us don't. I happen to be one of those that don't. But I live in a 55 plus community, and I met my friend Jan, who heard that I had been in a German camp. She said, "Can I introduce you to a friend of mine?" And I said, "Of course, no problem." Not really realizing what was going to happen. Once you meet Sandy, her enthusiasm of keeping this alive so that it won't happen anymore, that she's trying to do. And sorry, I have to read my notes. To keep all of this alive is irresistible, even though you don't want to talk about your past. And she tries tirelessly to keep all this alive, to stop this outrageous acts from happening again. I would like you to please applaud Sandy Schuler. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, I didn't expect that.
A lot of you probably do not know the Channel Islands. A lot of you do. A lot of you have been there with me. Here we go. Is that focused?
Okay.
This is the island of Guernsey. And this is the island of Sark. And you can see that it's France there. 1939, the war started in Germany. Excuse me, I was 8 to 11 when this happened, so I do have to get to my notes. Autumn of 1941, Britain put into process the intention of interning German officers and citizens who were fighting against the Allied cause in Iran. Iran was called Persia at the time. Hitler was outraged at this. So he put out an order that he wanted at least 10 British people to be interned in Germany during the war. There were about 5 internment camps in Germany itself. And so we had to be notified as to who was to go. And my dad was the only dentist on the island at the time, and he did very well. In 1939, he had a sailboat. And and his wife and my 2 older brothers were taking a sail to France. They weren't really aware of the war at that time. It wasn't so focused on the islands. And they docked in Cherbourg, France. Then the Germans came on the boat and said, "We're going to have to confiscate your boat." So this was at night, and my dad said, "Well, we don't have any place to sleep. Can we sleep on board, and you can have the boat in the morning?" So you guess what happened? They pushed away from the dock in the dark and sailed away. Went back home. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in autumn of 41, it was 42 when they came to the island. I was 6, I think. I was born in St. Petersburg, October 9th, 1934. Yes, I was born in St. Petersburg. My nephew doesn't think I was. Anyway, so we had to evacuate. They sent us notices with our names on them, They took so many children, there were only 70 children from the Island of Guernsey. But there was probably 5,000 people that Hitler wanted to take them from all 4 islands. Guernsey being the second largest. Jersey was the largest. I don't know if you can see those. I'm probably standing in the middle. And Sark was the smallest island. That's only about 1.5 miles by 1.5 miles. Guernsey is 6 miles by 3 miles, just to give you an idea of the sizes and how many people are there. There were less than 600 people on the island of Sark, and there were 60,000 people in Guernsey. As soon as the Germans dropped a bomb on both Guernsey and Jersey, and 44 people were killed. Then the planes came, they landed in the islands. We did not have a military, and they just we're taking over your house, we're taking your car, we're taking everything you have. And that's what they did. They took everything we had. My dad had a house in the country, he had an apartment in town, which wasn't very far. We could walk that distance. But his boat was gone. His boat was gone, and for when we came back. But we had orders to go and wait at a theater to be evacuated to Germany. And they take roll call, then they send us home. We don't have a boat for you yet. But I should just go back before this happened. The British sent 3 ships to Guernsey to evacuate older boys. In my family, I have 2 older brothers and 1 younger brother. My parents panicked. All the parents panicked. They had meetings at the schools as to what are we going to do. And they sent my 2 older brothers to the mainland, as we called it, England. We called it mainland. But I was too young to go. I was 6 to 8, and by the time I was 8, we were evacuated to Germany. And we had to take this boat across the island to France. Oh, I should tell you that my 2 older brothers got over to England, so they were safe and could live a life. We were interned in a camp after we had taken this boat across the channel. Let me stand over there. After we take the channel, and we went into San Marlo, where the Germans greeted us with rifles loaded, a sausage, we were given a sausage each, and some stale bread. And that lasted us for 3 days. Got on a roll call was all the time. Got on a train, took us 3 days to get to Dorston. Dorston was a filthy camp, absolutely filthy. The only way to go to the bathroom was by a crack in the cement of the floor. There was an enamel potty for children, just one, and there were 70 for Guernsey. Anyway, to me, being 8 to 11, I thought, okay, this is the way to live. I didn't know any difference, but of course my parents did. They never sort of alerted us. My brother was 2 years younger, that we were in danger. So we were lucky. We did. I don't know if they thought they were in danger too. Then we were only in Dorston for about 7 weeks. So then they put us on a train again. And that was another 3 days to get to Doron, which is south of the Black Forest. Conditions were much better there, much more improved. And we arrived there just before Christmas. And I remember hearing people say, we're not going to spend a Christmas here. Anyway, we spent 3 Christmases there. We were sort of left to our own, making life as well as we could and as well as we knew. You know, teachers got together, artists, we had a lot of artists. I have birthday cards that people gave me when I was in the camp that they drew. And just people got together. There was a Red Cross. Food was awful. It was rutabaga soup, cabbage leaf soup, but that's all that they could afford to give us. Germans couldn't afford to feed us. They didn't know what was going on. There were the Nazis, and there were the good Germans. I think that happens in any country, you know, the good people and the bad people. I think the life is getting better anyway. So there were barracks. What was it, 23 barracks? Just somebody said 23 barracks. And we each had to file into a barrack that fitted 84 people.
18.
For 18, right. And so we were in bunk beds. My brother and I slept in the same bed. And the beds were made out of straw with sackcloth covering the straw. And the fun part of that was, you know, after you slept on a straw mattress, it goes flat. And we would open up the mattress and fluff up the straw and then sew it back as west as we could. And we enjoyed, as children, just jumping on those beds once they were flat. I do remember that. We had food, we had roll call 3 times a day. The men were separated from the women. They were allowed to be we were all allowed to be together as families during the day from, I think it was 8:30 until 10 at night. And, but again, we still had to have roll call 3 times a day. We had to stand outside and do that. But when we got to bivouac, it was in November. It was very, very cold. And I remember very well, it was so cold, I kept saying to Mother, I'm just crying, so cold, you know, and I was 8 years old. And she threw a blanket around me and she tied it together with a safety pin. And the safety pin was so cold, I can still feel it on my chest. So that's some time ago. But you can still feel those things that happen. Anything else about, the Red Cross sent us parcels. Got a picture of that, which were a blessing. And they came with string. They came with everything that we needed. There was like a can of condensed milk that was watered down, would last us a month. That was our milk. We were lucky, much luckier than some people. Can of Spam? My mother would cut it so thin. I still enjoy it today. A can of corned beef. We were so lucky to get that. And then people will get different things in these Red Cross parcels, that like cigarettes, and my parents didn't smoke. So we were allowed to write letters to my 2 older brothers, and they were allowed to write to us, but the Germans had to read it. Red Cross had to read it and to approve it. We have an original letter here, thanks to my niece, where my mother wrote that she had traded a packet of cigarettes, and it's usually a packet of 10 in those days, for a pen so that she could write to her sons. And so all of that went on. The string, we made hats, we made handbags, we made lots of things, with a whole lot of things from the Red Cross parcels. So that was a blessing. Liberation. from then on, we were pretty much left to ourselves. Red Cross inspectors came. But remember, this is where we were for 3 years. If you're locked up in a place for 3 years, you think, okay, especially at my age, this is the way to live. But my parents, it was harder for them because they weren't out earning a living. None of us were, the older people. Even the Red Cross inspectors wondered how people would be able to function in life again after being closed up for 3 years. Well, what my dad did, he sold everything when we came home back to Island of Guernsey, and started up as an associate. Because he was older. He was 40 years old when I was born. So it's very hard for them to start life all over again, just in your late 40s. But liberation, 3 weeks before liberation came, the war headed towards Biberach. And we really didn't know too much was going on. Planes were landing, dropping bombs. They missed the camp, thank goodness, but they did hit the town, and it was the American planes. And just before that, a German officer came to the camp and told us that they were bringing in a whole lot of Jews and a whole lot of Arabs into our camp. We didn't have room for them. But they were so impoverished. I remember a poor guy being wheeled in a wheelchair by somebody. And found out later he had died and he was of the Jewish faith. So I'm sure they had terrible times. But the others, we tried to help them with clothing and food because they had no clothes, no shoes, nothing. So anyway, they brought these people to our camp. And then 3 weeks later, tanks started coming to our camp, the Free French, and we could hear it, we were told. White flags went up in the camp all the time, and a Guernsey flag was flown. And these tanks, and I remember it well because my dad and I were, I don't know where we were, but I remember we were looking out the window and there was a hut right, it was further than that room, probably the end of the library. And my dad and I were watching what these Germans were trying to do, and several ran back into that hut. And I saw this big tank come, and it was driving down like this. So it went like this to the hut, boom. And the hut came down in flames. I mean, they were trying to shoot it at a tank. But that was best for them. Probably that was their orders, for all we know, but they lost their lives. But it took at least a month, even though the war was over, for us to be evacuated from the camp because of transportation. And our last name was Pay, P-A-Y. My full name is Jill Vincent Pay Oliver. And P was at the end of the alphabet, so you had to wait till your alphabet was done. And then Dakotas came, or trucks took us to the airport, and we landed in Hendon, and then we got back to Guernsey. But we were pretty much bored, very bored in the camp. Musicians got together, which helped relieve the boredom, and people would put on shows as best as they could. We were allowed to have one suitcase to take with us to the camp, and only one thing that we could carry. So I'm sure the children didn't have much to carry. I don't remember carrying anything, but maybe I did. You don't remember. How many of you remember what you were doing when you were 8 years old? Anyway, and so I really do not like talking about my life, but here I am. But in 2006, I went to a party, and I must have had a little too much to drink. Because this very nice guy said to me, "What did you get for Christmas when you were a child?" And I quickly said, "An orange," because I do remember getting an orange in our Red Cross Parcels. And he went home, took him 3 years, and he wrote a book, word for word. And I'd like to him, this is David Treadway, and he wrote a book about my life. Thank you.
It was actually 2006. We were invited to a Boxing Day dinner, day after Christmas. And we only knew the host. There was about 7 or 8 other people there, and Jill was one of them. And just to start conversation around the table, I said, "Jill, what's your oldest Christmas memory?" And she actually said, "I remember the Christmas that me and my family, all we got was one orange to share." And somebody else said, "I just want orange." And she said, "That's all they gave us in the camp in Germany during the war." And I love history, and I never had the chance to talk to somebody that had been in one of the camps. So somebody else at the table said, "I didn't realize you were Jewish." And she said, "I'm not, I'm a British citizen." And she went on to tell us, which I had never heard, that in I think it was 1940 in June, the British pulled all their military out of the Channel Islands because they didn't want them destroyed trying to defend them. And the Germans in June flew in and took over. So at that time, Jill was 6, and she shared some stories around the table, and and the stories are in the book. There's actually quite a few stories because we became friends on Facebook and kept in touch, and it wasn't until 2019. So we had stayed friends for 13 years. She gave me permission to write her story. And it took me 2 years, a little over 2 years. I didn't write every day, but we came out to San Diego and stayed with her, and she shared a lot of things. I did video conferencing with her, and her family shared a lot of pictures from a family history book that they had put together. But she shared stories around the table. And I don't know if I ever told you this, but Jackie came up to me afterwards, and she said that Jackie was the one that invited us to the dinner. And she said, "I don't know what it was about you asking Jill a question, but her family's known about that, but she never really shared a lot of details." And so we just became friends, and it's been a special journey.
Yes, it has.
And about a month and a half after the book was published, we went to Guernsey with Jill and 11 of her family members, some of these folks here, and that was really special. There's an occupation museum, and one of the really special things was we found the house that her dad had built, that they were actually kicked out of by the Germans. And we met the new owners. They invited us in for tea and showed us around, but it was special just watching Jill walk around the house with the owner, because it was basically the same, they just added on to it. But so yeah, it's been a special journey, and she's a special friend. So thank you.
Thank you. Do any of you have any questions for Jill?
I'd just like to add that it was amazing that when we got back to England, clothing and food was rationed until 1954.
Wow.
So it shows how hard it was in the British Isles at that time. And there was no way my dad could return and be a dentist on the island. Nobody could afford dental care then. There was no such thing as insurance at the time.
She didn't get out in 1945, she got out in 1946.
Right.
That really,
Right.
I just, that just shocked me. You know, because it's over and you're still in the camp. Do any of you have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Did your older brothers survive? Were they drafted?
Did your
Uh,
older
the-
brothers
um,
survive?
Mark's father was drafted, yes, in the Royal Air Force.
No, he
His-
joined, wasn't drafted, he signed up on purpose.
He signed up on purpose, Mark and Colin, their brother and sister. And my other brother was a chef in a restaurant. But he got very sick, and at that time, you know, they couldn't not work. He had to work, and he got needed a heart bypass, which they didn't do at that time. So he died at 36 years old. We're so sorry about that. But today people live now, thank goodness, thanks to surgery.
Yes, ma'am.
What made you want to come to California, San Diego? Was there someplace before?
Opportunity and climate. Does nothing but rain in England. And the British people kept saying, and I remember this because it was so not me, you can't do that. They would say, you can't do that if I wanted to do something. And I still felt like I was in prison. You can do it in America. I became an American citizen, and I love America.
I just want to fill in because this was a very difficult thing for Jill to do. The first time I introduced Sandy and Jill, and we're all wanting to hear Jill's story, she just said, read the book, read the book, read the book, read the book, read the book. And that was as much as she could share at that time. So for her to do this today, 6 months later,
Thank you, Jen.
has been a tremendous act of courage for her. So I hope that we can appreciate, everybody can appreciate that this is really way out of her comfort zone. But she did a great job.
Thank you, Jen.
Saying that I truly, truly appreciate the gratitude, because you I don't know if you realize that you mentioned several times how grateful you were for that liver of spam, for that little bit of I don't know, what's it, corned beef. You know, you were so grateful for for that pin that was holding your coat, and you still remember it. That I'm gonna take that for the rest of my life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill, did you understand what she said?
I think
That there's so much gratitude, even talking about the corned beef, and just your gratitude with everything, that she's going to take that gratitude for the rest of her life for what you've done. And you're causing people to cry in here, okay?
Just think of that every time you buy a can of corned beef or a can of Spam. It was delightful.
Was there a question? Mitch?
How has your experience in the camp affected your relationship and your attitude towards Germans?
How is your relationship?
It's rough, and I'm sorry, I'm very hard to hear, as you can tell. It's rough. I go back to Guernsey, and I see all these bunkers, and I do not like it, but they're keeping it for people to remember. Alderney, which is the island that was closest to England, all they have on that island now is bunkers, which is where the Germans built the bunkers to hopefully take over England, which, thank goodness, to the Americans, they didn't. Jeanette.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you be willing to share with the group your meeting with Queen Elizabeth?
Can you talk about when you met Queen Elizabeth?
Yes, it was
You
beautiful.
didn't tell
I
me
can't.
that.
I know.
Wait! I'm gonna teach you.
I forgot about that. Anyway, and Liberation Day came one time, and I happened to be, we celebrate Liberation Day in Guernsey every year. I happened to be on the island at the time, and my sister-in-law, I still have relatives there, and my sister-in-law had saved some paperwork and said that I was one of the internees in this camp, and the Queen and the Duke were coming to the island to acknowledge us. So they came, and we went, and I couldn't believe this. It was absolutely beautiful. We internees, there was about 200 of us left at that time. It was quite a few years ago. I think there's only about 10 of us left now. There's about 200 of us left, and they set the room up so well. In fact, it was very similar to this. There was a door there and a door there. And they had a red carpet going around like a U from that door to that. We were told to stand away from the red carpet. Queen came in one door, and the Duke came in the other. And they spoke to both of us, all of us. So the Queen announced how she was glad that we were still with us. She was still with us. Can you remember anything else I said to you? And it was special.
What about, would you be okay talking about the hospital stay that you had while you were in the camp?
When you were in the hospital?
Yeah. Okay, there were 3 of us, 2 guys and myself, got really sick. Really sick. And I had a fever for about 3 weeks, and my parents said, okay, to the German guards, okay, we need help here. This girl, I don't remember that too much, but I do remember sitting on I don't know whether it was a nurse or a nun, but to me it felt like a nun, and that we were at a church. Again, remember, I was 8 years old. And I sat on a person's lap. What is it? Well, it was a female. This is my nephew. They put me as a child on a step, and they wrapped their legs around mine and through my arms.
Oh, yeah.
There, like this.
Wow.
And someone held my, okay, let go. Somebody held onto my head, and I remember this mouthpiece going in, and you pass out. They took my tonsils out,
Oh, my.
and you pass out from the pain. And I remember waking up on a stretcher. It was a rubber stretcher, and there was blood, and it reeked awful. But they saved my life. You have to be grateful.
How did you get there?
Oh, yeah. A German soldier took us.
Snuck out.
I think I did.
Yeah, there's a lot more detail in the book about that story, because
He did more
we talked to
research.
her so much, and in talking over a couple years of research, it would bring up other memories that she would share, and I recorded it all. But that story, actually, her dad, he was allowed to take some of his dental tools. So he was doing dental work in the camp to other interns, but also to German soldiers and officers and stuff. And he had befriended this one, I think his name was Hans.
Yeah.
Good German name. Had befriended him because he had done some dental work for him. And when Jill was sick, Hans came in one night and snuck her and the 2 boys out of the camp and walked, I think,
It was in the town.
through the snow for an hour to get to either this church or hospital, which she couldn't remember. But they took her tonsils out with no anesthesia. And then he carried her back to the camp through the snow with the two boys and got them back into the camp before morning.
And they saved our lives.
David,
Wow.
continue sitting here, and then you can share the mic this way. Okay?
But that was one of the stories, not as detailed, but that she shared around the table that day at dinner. And she had never really shared that with a lot of people. And so it was just a really special time.
Didn't you meet Hans later?
Pardon?
Didn't you meet Hans again later?
Yes. He came to spend some time with my parents and myself. I was married at the time. And him and his wife came, and he was not a Nazi, he was a German. But like I say, I really would like the island to get rid of all of that stuff, because it's not a nice memory. And the island of Albany is a beautiful island, but it's so disturbed with all these bunkers that they made. And some people are actually proud of those things. I would demolish them. We don't want any of that in our lives. But you're keeping it alive.
Yeah.
So that we can.
I have a question.
Okay.
David, you wrote a book. What did you forget to tell David? Is there anything that should have been in the book that you forgot to tell him?
What was it?
I don't know. Is there something after the book came out that you thought, I should have told David about this?
Well, I have apologized to him because I was not really helpful. Because I really do not like talking about myself. And he did a lot of research with the help of Melody and her sister Charmaine. They put a book together about us, the family. And then he went online quite a bit. And he looked at a whole lot of paraphernalia, which I have here. I do remember doing embroidery, somebody with sewing. I made a sampler. My son has the original, and he's put it in a beautiful, beautiful case. I was going to donate it to the museum in Guernsey, and my son said, no way. He wanted it. And I had kept it. I kept it in a drawer, which preserved it. I didn't realize how that preserved it, just being in the dark, I guess. And it was from the sack material, piece of sack material, and the thread that we were able to get. And I loved doing the embroidery. They put like a Girl Scout troop together. They tried to do that, but we didn't have pencils and papers like you could get. I had 3 books given me by the Red Cross and the YMCA. I have 2 of them here. And this one book, it's called Runaway Home. I read it, and read it, and read it, and I could read the whole thing to you without looking in the book when I was 11 years old. Because it was a book, but it was a life story that I didn't know existed. It's about a family who went away on a vacation. We never did that, you know, so it was not a true story to me.
When I was doing the research, I'd known Jill for a long time, and she said, well, I have things I brought back from the camp, which I didn't know she had done that. And I was like, are you serious? And she said, yeah, I'll send it all to you for your research. And I said, oh, you don't have to do that, just send me pictures. And she said, no, I know you'll get it back to me. So these life treasures that she brought back from the camp when she was 11, yeah, definitely come up later and take a look at it, because that's stuff that she actually brought back from the camp. And she sent it to me, and I had it for a couple of months and sent it back to her after I detailed everything and pictures and stuff. But
Then he sent me his very first book, and I love it.
Give a little preview of the book without telling a bunch of stuff. I wanted to write it in a way that made it fun to read history, especially for teenagers. And so it's part 1 and part 2. And part 1 is actually a completely fictitious story. It's about a teenage girl that some things happen in her family that kind of sends her down the wrong path, and she gets into trouble, and she has to go to court, and the judge just has a heart for kids to try and turn them around, and he knows that she's a history major. So for her community service, he orders her to help this elderly lady write her life story. So part 2 is Jill meeting this teenage girl and telling her story in her own words.
He did say he would change the names, but I said, I'm too old to worry about it.
Can we answer the question?
Yeah, please, ask a question.
Jill, do you recall anything your parents would share after about their struggle to transition back home?
That is ironic. We never said a thing. Never said a thing about it. And I'm so sorry now, of course. But they were 40 years older than me. They were 40 when I was born, so we were not too close for too long. When we came back from the camp, they sent me to boarding school for 4 years. So I still felt like I was in prison. It was horrible. So anyway, I'm thrilled I came to America.
Can I interject on that just a bit?
Yes.
So even as family, we didn't know a lot because no one talked about it. It wasn't just her
Yes.
parents. My father was, well, let me get back into that a little bit. So when she said that there were boats that came and took kids, it was all of the school children. So she wasn't old enough to be in school, but my father and his little brother was, and they were billeted, what they were called billeted, to the middle of England, not in London, but in the middle. And a lot of kids from London were moved out to the middle. And so my father, at 12 years old, never lived with his parents again. And he was billeted to another family. And if you, movies have been made about that. The Chronicles of Narnia are about that. And so no one talked about it. It was, my father never talked about it, and my Aunt Jill never talked about it until my sister really started bringing that out a little bit. And it is super important to know that all of this happened, but that's the reason why your parents probably never did either.
I think a lot of guys from World War II in the U.S., they came back and went to work and raised their families and never talked about it.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until one of the big things was Tom Hanks doing Band of Brothers and got those guys together. And a lot of Tom Hanks talks about it, that's the first time any of them shared things that happened that they hadn't shared with even their own families.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that they never talk about it, and even to this day, they're not really talking about it. But is there a reason for that? My mother was a nurse in a hospital in Chicago right after World War I, and she talked one time about the dreams of German girls in the 1920s that Hitler was already trying to raise his own army. German girls were brought to Chicago. And I only one time remember her talking about that and never talked again. So why was everything kept so secret? Do we know?
Jill, why was everything kept such a secret? Why was it so hard to talk about
I
this?
think it might be the same reason that I don't want to talk about my life.
You put the microphone to you. There you go.
I think it might have been the same reason that I don't want to talk about my life. We don't want to talk about that, but Sandy's making us.
But it's so important, really, that we know this.
It's so important that we know this.
Did what?
She said it's so important that we know this.
Yes, and that is what I have said. Sandy is so infectious at trying to keep this alive so that we can hopefully not let those outrageous acts happen again.
And that was my whole purpose for writing the book. It may or may not ever make any money, but it was to get her story out there because I thought it was so important. And just in talking, when we were over in Guernsey, so many things happened there. The book is actually in circulation in the library in England. We were interviewed, mainly Jill, by ITV when we were over there in Guernsey. And they did a full 3 minutes that evening on their 30-minute newscast about her story. And they mentioned the book, but the next day, me and my wife were in the lobby of the hotel, and there was another couple in the lounge, and there was another couple there, and this lady got up and walked over, and she said, "Are you the author of the book they're talking about?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I'm the director of the Lincolnshire, England Library." And she goes, "I'd like to have the book in the library." And the thing I remember a couple months later with the email that she sent me was she said that she had got the book for herself, and she really loved it. She said this should be a school curriculum here because there's so many young people that have no idea of what really happened with a lot of things with the war, but especially with what happened with the Channel Islanders.
And the other thing you have to remember is when we talk about the Holocaust, I've tried so hard in this library and in this particular project not to focus on people that were Jewish. They were children, they were gay, they were Jehovah's Witness, they were people that had their islands taken away. We have to understand that this can happen, and we have to do everything we can to not let this ever happen, and to wake up our youth that's sitting next to me who was here 2 days ago in the library with her school. And that's why this is so important. This, quote, history of hate, which I don't like to focus on, because that's why we need people like Jill and the survivors that speak and the memorabilia that, we have a difference of opinion about it because she doesn't want to see it, and it's so important for you to see what is out there. Or those people that have things and they say, we just don't want this in our home anymore. What can we do to create a museum? And that's what we're working so hard on. And I do have people that are watching my back. In fact, they're watching my back right now, right, Bob? And they make sure that we're doing what we need to do, not what Sandy needs to do, but what we need to do. And that's why this is so important. When your story came about, Jill, I was like, this is amazing. This is amazing. Imagine if you were in Coronado, this is what I tell the kids, and then somebody comes up and says, okay, we're going to take your island and put you on a barge, and then you're going to be sick for 3 days, and then you get on a transport and you end up in a camp. I mean, who does that? How could that happen? You have to sleep with your eyes open, and you have to say something. If you don't say something, we're going to be in trouble. We will be in trouble.
Andy, your analogy rings so true. My mother, who just turned 90, her father was a naval officer during the war, and they were living in Point Loma, stationed there, and they were actually evacuated, a lot of the officer families and military families, to Descanso, because they were worried, the Pacific coast, what could happen, and thought they might be targeted. So she spent 2 years in Descanso during the war, which from Point Loma was like a whole different world.
Sure. And that's what these speaking series are so important. Interject, say something. That's why we're here on one level. This is what I love about this room. This is what I love about our group. We're having a conversation. This is what's so important. If something is in you, please say it, okay?
Question over here. I just want to say thank you. My daughter's 11, so she never got, I don't know what, an opportunity to hear from you. So, thank you.
She said that she wants to thank you because her 11-year-old daughter is here, and for somebody to hear a Holocaust survivor is very, very rare.
your 11-year-old daughter? Well, I am amazed, honored to have you come and listen to this. Okay, I hope it never happens to you. And thank you for coming.
We have a mini museum set up here.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, ma'am, of course.
Where was the boarding school that she was sent to?
Where was the boarding school that you were at?
Oh, this is interesting too. I had spent 4 years in this boarding school. It was run by 3 spinsters. My mother said, it was an old girls' school. My mother said, why don't you teach them to cook, to do accounting, to do a budget? And these 3 spinsters said, my girls will marry into money. Well,
Did
guess
you know
what? That didn't turn out. And it's kind of funny to have 3 spinsters say that. But anyway, we spent 4 years there.
Where was it?
Where was
sorry,
it?
yes. Sidmouth is in the south of England. Do you know it?
No.
Oh, okay. That's one of the warmer parts of the British Isles. And that was as bad as the camp for me. So basically, I felt in prison for 7 years.
Do you still have family in Guernsey?
Yes, I do. We've stayed with them, and I'm going back in September because in 2022, 2 years ago, David and his lovely wife Kate and myself went, and several of my relatives came too. I have 2 nieces that live on the island, and we spent a lot of time, like David said, with going to be on TV, signing books, and reporters coming, and we had to listen to them. We were there, 10 days?
Yeah, about around that.
And it happened to be my 88th birthday then.
She was queen.
Queen for a week.
Yeah, for a week. That's what we said.
And had a lovely birthday party at one of the hotels there with all the family. So that was lovely. It was surreal. But I didn't spend enough time with my 2 nieces that live on the island. So I decided to go back again in September this year. And I'm spending quality time with each one of them by myself. Several nieces wanted to come with me, and I said, no, this time myself with them, because they were so kind to us down in the island when we were there, and I probably saw them, 2 days? If that. We were too busy. But it was a lovely trip, and I will never forget it. And it's thanks to David that we did it.
One of the really special things that happened while we were on Guernsey, after the broadcast that night on the news, the next day a lady called the hotel looking for Jill. And she ended up coming that evening, but she was a little girl in the camp, and her and Jill.
Wow.
David gets emotional. He's full of feelings.
She's just so special.
But that little girl, they hadn't seen each other in 77 years since they were liberated.
It was surreal.
So she was able to come, they spent time together, and we have videos and pictures of the 2 of them just holding hands and sharing stories. And then the next day another lady called. The newspaper had done an article about her story in the book about a month before our trip, and this lady had purchased the book. And reading the book, even though she was born after the war, she realized that her mother and father, and I think aunt and uncle and grandmother, or grandfather, they were on the same ship deported to Germany as Jill and her family and in the camp with her family. And her mom had passed away like 25 years before. And so she wanted to come and meet Jill. And Jill was kind of a connection to her mom that had passed away like 25 years before. And she was actually more emotional than the friend that had been in the camp with her that hadn't seen her in 77 years. When they got ready to say goodbye, she wouldn't let go of Jill. So yeah, it was a very, very special time.
Yeah, made it be like one. Yeah, it was special, very special. Question?
When you returned back, do you remember?
Pardon?
When you came back? When you came back?
Were you able to get back into your house, and do you remember what it looked like, or if they
Yes, I do.
kept it nice?
My mother had a very decorative eye. She had furniture that she had nailed into the walls. It was like, a dressing table and bookcases. She had it all nailed into the wall. Well, all of the furniture was pulled out of the walls and put in one room. Now, we don't know if that was the Germans that did it or the British on the island, that lived on the island, that did it, because we were not, we didn't get back to Guernsey until sometime after the war. As soon as the war was over, the Germans left the islands. The people on the island still were as starving as we were, because ships had to bring food into the island. Even though Guernsey was known for its potatoes and its tomatoes, they call them tomatoes, and flowers. Guernsey was the sun island. There was nothing left. I don't know if you've seen these books too. They even did videos, DVDs of. It's called Enemy at the Door. And these were done years ago. Yes, Enemy at My Door. And it's all about the islands when they were occupied by the Germans. If they had a cow, it was slaughtered for the Germans. Everything was for the Germans. But if they had a pig, I remember this, that died, and they covered it up so that they didn't know, the Germans didn't see it, and managed to have pork for dinner. So that was a delicacy. Oh, it was just as hard on the islands. My grandmother and my mother's sisters were still on the island, Gags and Auntie Gay. And people were dying because they were starving. I should tell you a little thing that happened in Sark when the Germans took over the islands. There were less than 600 people in Sark. And there were 11 people were told that they had to evacuate by the Germans. And they had to be at the dock at a certain time. 9 people showed up. So the Germans decided they were going to go find these other 2 people, which was very easy in this small island. And their dog showed, not the Germans' dog, people who owned the dog, took the Germans to where their owners were. They'd slit their wrists. Major Skelton died. She was still alive. And the Dame of Sark called Guernsey, because there was no hospital in Sark. Called Guernsey, they sent over an ambulance boat, took her back to the island, to Guernsey, and after a long illness, she was able to go back to Sark. But, this was ridiculous. He could have still been alive too. But this is the way people felt. They didn't want to be interned, and I can totally understand. It was scary for them. It really wasn't scary for me. I thought this was the way to live. And it's taken me the rest of my life to realize the way to live. Because you are so installed in being in a secluded spot for so long. Freedom is wonderful, and America has that. Thank you all for being here.